Hello and welcome to this special program of India Interacts, coming to you from the JNU Convention Center at the Jawaharlal Nehru University campus in Delhi. Our guests today on the subject of the future of financial reforms, tricky as that may sound, are Montek Singh, Ahluwalia, TK Arun, Nilotpal, Basu and RV Kanoria. They represent different constituencies and we're going to understand more of their constituencies and of course their views that they will bring on the issue of reform. Now before we do that, let me also tell you that we've got an interesting audience of young people here, mostly I'm assuming from JNU and maybe elsewhere, who are going to maybe question us on some of the concepts that we talk about or some of the propositions that we put forward. Dr. Ahluwalia, let me begin with you. Sitting where you are as at the Planning Commission, what does financial reform mean to you today?
Well, you know, it's a whole range of things that have remained valid because we have to develop the financial sector. But the most recent addition to that concept is the whole issue of financial inclusion. That is that the financial system is not just for the top 20–30% of the population, but everybody should have access to a bank account. That's quite an important thing right now.
Right. So, and you would you also say that when we talk about reform, it's an ongoing exercise? We have a long way to go?
I don't like the term reform anymore because it's a motherhood statement.
Yeah.
Everything is now called a reform.
Yeah.
So I personally think there's governance issues, decision-making issues, legislative changes, economic policy. You can lump all of this and call it reform. And secondly, reform is not just something that's an agenda for tomorrow or today. I mean, you know, we're much below $2,000 per capita. So we have to get to 30, 40,000 in a sustainable way over the next 30, 40 years. So this reform is going to keep on happening,
right.
And it's going to mean different things at different times.
Right, and I guess one of the things we want to do today is, we're at the end of 2012, is to try and see how many of these we can fit into a set of tasks for 2013, which will give us something to focus on for the next year.
That's an annual agenda, that's not reforms.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Yeah, but reforms for, I mean, and what you would do in the next year or so.
Fair enough.
TK?
What we primarily need is actually political reform and judicial reform. While we talk about economic reform, many of the things that prevent India from realizing its full potential is actually structural problems in the polity. Political funding, for example. It is opaque, is non-transparent, and almost exclusively drawn from corruption. Political funding is mobilized by looting the exchequer, extorting money from the public, or selling patronage. This is not how India can thrive as a democracy or become efficient. If you are ranked 142nd or 3rd on the ease of doing business rankings of the world, it is only because we create these hurdles in order to collect rent at every stage. Now, unless this changes, it is very difficult for many of the proposed economic reforms to actually get implemented. The second thing is judicial reform. Once prosecution starts, there is no reason why it should go beyond, say, 23 months to be completed beyond the final appeal. Today, Amit Shah, a prime accused in a case of encounter killings, cold-blooded murder, extortion, he is fielded as a candidate by the BJP in Gujarat because he has not been acquitted beyond final appeal. So these kind of criminalization politics, which prevents cleaning up of the polity, which in turn hinders economic progress and economic reform, will be sustained unless we speed up the judicial process. So these are key prerequisites for advancing economic reform.
Mr. Kanoria?
I think, I mean, if you talk about financial reforms or you talk about...
No, you define reform the way you want to define it. This is just to set the stage for today.
See, I think ultimately whatever we do in this country should be ultimately for the benefit of the citizen of this country. And that's really what our objective should be. The way I look at this process is that India has a lot of programs going for it, but really doesn't have a kind of overarching dream or an overarching goal which we need to create. I think this whole concept, I mean, from industry we talk about growth, and at times it meets with a lot of resistance as to whether, what is that growth for. So I think that identity of what growth is really meant for needs to be created within the system, and the communication which is required for the economic upliftment of, those who have actually not been part of this growth story. I mean, when we talk about inclusive, let's say Montek talked about, financial reforms meaning that it should become financial inclusion. Yeah. I think inclusion, the word inclusion needs to become all pervasive in our system, ultimately the whole process of reform must benefit every sector of society and should not be exclusive to any sector. But we are always going to have this debate of, when we talk about inclusive growth, whether inclusion should come before growth or whether growth should come before inclusion. Now, my personal view is that you need to have growth before you can even think about inclusion. So that's one aspect of it. The second, I think, is that, we in the country we have a lot of welfare programs which are a necessary concomitant to the current economic status. I think some of these programs are, they are benefiting unintended classes of people. That needs to also undergo a change. So when we talk about financial reforms, this whole concept of cash transfer of subsidies or the Aadhaar scheme or creating that identity where we identify the right people who need to be supported to really bring them back into the, so that needs to
But I know that
happen.
you're not saying anything from an industry point of view.
So I really, from an industry point of view, if you ask me,
I mean, not that you should, but it sounds
I can get
funny.
into specific points on industry point of view. I think the taxation system should be stable and transparent. I feel the judicial system, which Mr. Arun referred to, should deliver justice on time, not just deliver justice. So delivering justice and justice delayed is justice denied, in my opinion. So I don't think we have a system which allows that to happen.
Mr. Basu?
I think essentially reform will become meaningful only if it can deliver the benefits of those reforms to each and every citizen of this country. And to do that, I think you need to have the government address certain major concerns of the people. Because what reforms have meant all these days is less of government. But actually, if you try to scrutinize the process, you will find that actually the government is very proactive, and the government is actually doing everything possible to see to it that the market becomes the all-present, omnipotent force which will take care of anything. And the last 20 years of reforms in this country, like rest of the world, has shown that this paradigm has actually accentuated inequalities, have accentuated poverty, have accentuated unemployment, thereby reducing aggregate demand. I mean, which is the precondition for even the interplay of market forces. So if you concentrate unilaterally on market, you are actually creating your own, you are sounding your own death knell. And that is precisely what is happening. Today in this country, you have industry announcing from their rooftops that we have about 9 lakh crores of capital, but they are shy of investing that because they don't know whether they can sell those things given the global environment. So we think that reforms at this point of time should create conditions for investment, for spurring domestic demand, and so that this growth process becomes participatory. See, with 50% of the people roughly, I know Dr. Ahluwalia will not agree with me, but whichever you look at poverty figures in this country, it is roughly around 50%, and it is also not a poverty line, it is actually a subsistence line. So unless you draw in that huge sections of the people who could be potential buyers in the market, then only industry will grow and the rest will happen. And I think this single-minded obsession with growth, completely overlooking what effect that growth is having, I mean, has landed us in a situation. Yesterday we came to know of the latest weekly growth figures, and people are saying that maybe this year we will clock less growth than at any point in time in this country.
Mr. Basu, I'm going to interrupt you there. A couple of points that I would like to come back on, which is more to do with data on the poverty levels, and I mean, whether or not economic growth in the last 2 decades has improved poverty or has it made it worse. And I'll come back to you on that. Mr. Ahluwalia, just a broader point before I come back to some questions here. Is there a problem, or have we not sold the concept of economic growth effectively?
It's very interesting, by the way.
Communication
The first
problem.
question you asked me made it look as if this is a kind of a discussion on financial reform. Since then, we've covered a much broader ground.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want to say is the reason I didn't address these issues is I got the impression you wanted us to discuss financial sector reform. So now let me know, what is your question? You're saying we haven't sold the idea of growth?
Yeah.
Let me say,
It's a question.
I mean, look, no government anywhere ever says growth for its own sake. In the 11th plan, we said we want inclusive growth. In the 12th plan, we are saying inclusive and sustainable growth. Now, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind, and I think most people would agree, that, inclusive growth really means you need the growth because our income levels are so low that the idea that we can achieve social justice without getting growth is a pipe dream. But it's not enough to just have growth, nor I think is it enough to say let's first have growth. Because there is a view that says, well, let's first have the growth and then we'll do the rest. But the truth is, it's this nature and the structure of growth that determines how inclusive it is. I mean, for example, we have been consistently saying that you need to do a lot more for agriculture. So we're not talking about, let's say, a mining-based growth. I mean, globally, it's well recognized that a growth process that's dominated by the extractive industries, especially if the stuff is just exported, is not going to be very inclusive. I'm not saying anything against mining. We also need mining. But our whole approach has been, number one, agriculture must do a lot better than it's doing. And we need to know why that, what we can do about that. Number two, you do need to draw people out of the rural, agricultural, low-income employment into the non-agricultural, not necessarily non-rural. There's a lot of non-agricultural stuff in rural areas, hire skills, give them jobs in the employment, give them employment in the manufacturing sector. I mean, this is what has happened all around the world. It hasn't, in my view, happened as much as it should have in India because manufacturing has not absorbed too much employment. Now, there are many reasons for that. I mean, some people will say it's because, and I'm sure that Mr. Basu will not agree with me on this, many people will say our policies have not encouraged labor employment producing manufacturing. Others would say...
So even industry wouldn't agree. I mean,
what?
Even industry wouldn't agree. It's not
wouldn't agree with what?
Would agree that the government has done enough for manufacturing.
No, that's a different point. Yeah. I'm saying the notion that we haven't done enough for manufacturing is one thing. The notion that we haven't done enough so that manufacturing is employment-oriented is a separate thing. So I agree with you that we've not achieved, we wanted double-digit growth in manufacturing. We should be getting it. We haven't got it. And I've consistently said, by the way, the view that we've done very well in services and therefore we are leapfrogging, I mean, this is nonsense. I don't think a country at our level of income and of our size can afford not to have a manufacturing revolution. We should. But whatever manufacturing we've had, we've done a better job at high-end skills rather than low-end skills. Now, industry will say it's because your labor policies are too rigid. Other people will say other things. And that's a real issue. We need to go into that.
Right, and we're going to debate some of that, but we also have to take a break, and we'll come back, and we'll also now start getting in some questions on India Interacts. Stay with us. Welcome back to India Interacts as we debate the future of reforms and by, of course, first laying down the ground for what reforms are. And we've had a bit of a conversation around that. We're now talking to some of the students at the JNU Convention Center here in JNU and ask them what they think about reforms and what their concerns are. So anyone wants to go first?
Our central or state governments, they stress enough on implementation of policies because we have all kinds of policies.
Got it. Okay.
We have great thinkers, but as far as financial reforms is concerned, I think it's a lot related to infrastructure development, but we don't see that happening.
So is your question only on financial reforms or is it general?
Yeah, it's general. We don't seem to be stressing enough on implementation.
Yeah, behind you.
My question here is if we talk about reforms and they're ongoing, but do we also set a deadline to all of them? As in being a big population here, out of them, most of us most of the population is under party and is not able to eat properly and sleep. So do we set a deadline that, you know, by this year we'll have food for everybody and shelter for everybody?
Got it. Okay. Would you like to start off?
Yeah, it's good. Very good.
We've got 4 questions, I think.
You should think a little bit. I mean, what you said is quite a devastating comment. And I just put it to you. Do you really believe that most of the population means more than 50%, do not have enough food to eat? I mean, I'm not, just think about it, because I think what is happening is many things are talked about. I agree with the view that at any given time, we should be dissatisfied with what we've got. Otherwise, you're not going to make progress. But let's just get some facts right. When the reforms began, I think I gave a lecture in JNU, and at that time, everybody said these reforms will be a disaster, economic growth will collapse. Some of your distinguished professors here even wrote pieces arguing that this will lead to a decline in growth. So let us get one fact right. It didn't lead to a decline in growth. When the reform started, it took a little bit of time, but let's say in the 5 years before the last financial crisis in 2008, India became the second fastest growing economy in the world. And people who never thought about India began to focus on India. So one issue that all the people who say these reforms are nonsense, they're going to lead to a decline in growth, industry will collapse, etc., the rupee will collapse, etc., I think have been proved wrong. Now the more interesting question, which is I think government should address this. Has this reform benefited everyone? This is, in my view, the core question. If you ask me, do you think it has benefited absolutely everyone to the extent that it should have? The answer probably no, but no growth process gets everywhere. So then the next question is, did you put in place policies that would reach out for those who don't directly get absorbed in the growth process? The answer is yes, we did. Now the question is, were they well implemented? That addresses the point raised by the gentleman here. Almost certainly not perfectly. We're trying. And probably you win some, you lose some, but we should do a lot better. What do the facts say? Now, I've done some, I mean, you can check all this. You're all students, so you can get the data. If you look at the last 7 years, the decline in the percentage of the population below the poverty line, now, I'm separating the issue of whether this is a right poverty line or not. Many people have said we should raise it, so we've agreed and we've set up a committee under Rangarajan. But you know, even if you raise it, what will happen is the percentage below the poverty line will be higher, but 15 years earlier it will be even higher. So the question is, what is happening to this percentage? In the 10 years before 2004, it was declining at the rate of 0.8 percentage points per year. Between 2004 and 2011, it's declined at the rate of 2 percentage points per year. Now you can say it should have gone down at 3, and I would applaud that. But there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that in the last 7 years, if you're worried about poverty, we've done a better job.
So can I throw a quick question?
2 more questions.
Yeah?
These are students, they must have hard facts.
Yeah, no, it's a hard fact question.
What happened to agriculture? That is one of our core objectives. In the last plan, 11th plan period, agriculture grew at 3.35%. In the 10th plan period, it grew at 2.35%. So we should have done even more. We should have done 4, but I think agriculture did better. What has happened to real wages? In the period after 2007, real wages have gone up 4 times faster than in the previous period. And you put all of that together and you ask yourself, is it true that nobody is benefiting? It's simply not correct. Lots of people are benefiting. But what is really true in my view, and I think this is very important, standards have gone up. It's not enough to say to a poor person, you're better off than you were 5 years ago, etc. I think Nilotpal ji rightly pointed to the issue of equality. This has become a global concern now. So people are no longer judging whether they're getting enough by whether they're doing better. They're saying other people are doing so much more better. But you know, even there, it used to be felt that backward states will suffer. It's not true. In the post-reform period, the erstwhile backward states have grown rapidly. Not all of them, but many of them. So frankly, I feel that what the reforms have done is they've unleashed a lot of what I would call the innate creative energies of the economic system. You don't have to give the credit of this to the government, give the credit to India. But, and you can always say the government should have done even better. I mean, I would support that. But to argue that the last 10 years have not seen a transformation, I think is not being fair.
So can I quickly come in on that? No, the rate of decline of poverty. I have two separate questions. States like Orissa have actually shown, perhaps demonstrated the best track record in poverty alleviation.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So a layman's question is, how is that? I mean, because I think the popular perception is that state like Orissa is an economic backyard, number one. Number two, which is more to do with the figures that you mentioned, you talked about the rate of decline of poverty in the last decade. The average GDP growth rate was about 8.2% in that period.
Yes.
Now, what is going to happen to that the decline of poverty level when GDP goes down? Which
No, I'm delighted to hear that people are now worried that if the growth goes down, the poverty will not go down, and they're right. So let's focus on how to bring GDP growth up. 5 years ago, everybody was saying, you're worried about GDP growth. What is GDP growth? It doesn't matter. I think you said the right thing. If we don't bring the GDP growth back up, the rate of poverty reduction will go down. That's what we're trying to do, by the way. In the 11th plan, the average growth rate was 7.8%. We have set the target for the 12th plan at 8.2. I think Nilotpal ji made a very valid point that the last quarter is pretty bad, at 5.3. The first half of this year, 2012-2013, is 5.4. If this were to continue, we would have a very poor performance. But you need to analyze why has it happened and what can we do about it. And that's what the 12th plan is about.
Right. Mr. Basu? Sorry to keep you holding. Yeah.
First of all, I don't want to be harsh, but this whole poverty estimation business itself has really become something which would prompt one to say lies, damn lies, and statistics. The kind of parameters that are taken into account to estimate poverty is absolutely divorced from the Indian reality. And Dr. Ahluwalia was talking about agriculture and agricultural growth. Now, the fact of the matter is that agriculture is in a crisis. It is being recognized by everybody that Indian agriculture is in crisis. And the crisis is primarily because over the last 2 decades, there has been a sharp deceleration in the public investment in agriculture. I mean, one of the major crises in India is because still around 60% of the people in this country depend on agriculture, but the contribution of agriculture in the overall growth figures is continuously coming down, which clearly shows that there is a decline in the relative real income of the people engaged in agriculture. So, if that question has to be addressed, it cannot really bypass the issue of stepping up public investment in agriculture, one. Secondly, you see, you have a situation where the food production in this country is almost stagnating. It is hovering between 180 million tons to 220 million tons. Sometimes we do well. When monsoons do well, we go up. Sometimes monsoons don't do so well, we come down. And then related to that question is the distribution. You have a situation where India's position in the global hunger index really is really going down. I mean, there is more incidence of hunger, but at the same time, you have the vulgar, I should say, picture of about 8.5 crore tons of food grains rotting in your godowns, and there is no linkage between what the farmers produce and we expect that, you see, foreign direct investment. We think that the global retail chains will solve our problem of supply chain infrastructure. I don't know, because the figures that we have got is about 75% of grain storage in a country like America. It is done through public investment. These days we are comparing many things with China.
Mr. Basu, can I interrupt you? I think we have to go into a break, but we'll come back and I'll also take a few more questions, and then we'll talk about the future of financial reforms. And I also wanted to understand, Mr. Basu, really whether what you were saying in the context of agriculture was linked to reform. But I'll come back. Yeah. Stay with us. You're watching India Interact. Welcome back to India Interacts. My guests, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, TK Arun, RV Kanoria and Nilotpal Basu. We've been talking about financial reforms and reforms in general. We've pretty much laid the foundation. We've got some questions in. We've tried to answer them. We've thrown statistics in some cases. We've also countered those statistics. But I think what we want to try and now see is what we can do. Like I said in the beginning, this is the end of 2012. Yes, I'm coming to you. I said this is the end of 2012. We've got a whole year ahead. Can we start with a few things that we could achieve or do, even whether we call it an agenda or not? Mr. Basu, when I interrupted you before we went into a break previously, and if you could finish.
You see, therefore, the crisis is in agriculture. With this increasing incidence of farmer suicides, I mean, it is related to a major shift in the pattern of our agriculture, where petty agricultural production itself is becoming unviable. So I think one of the central focus, if the reform was to be meaningful to the people of this country, and I really feel very uncomfortable with the idea of marketing. I mean, if there is something meaningful, there is something useful, why do you need to market that? I mean, the real life experience of the people will really inspire them to embrace that. Therefore, I think agriculture, infrastructure, investment, and to find investment, there is enough of investment possible. Instead of again and again, I mean, this single-minded harping on fiscal deficit, and to prune that fiscal deficit, to slash whatever, semblance of subsidies there, and dole out money in tax concessions and so on and so forth.
Right. Mr. Basu, I think let me ask TK to come in. So, you know, we described a whole bucket of, or a basket of reforms earlier. Anything that you want to come back? We're saying that we want to find a few areas that we could focus on and maybe arrive at some meaningful conclusions.
No, before that, I would just like to comment on one thing.
Yeah.
Whether you believe statistics or not, you have to believe prices. If you look at inflation, inflation is reasonably high, and it is being driven primarily, apart from oil and imported prices of commodities, by food prices. And the food prices that are going up the most are vegetables, fruits, meat, fish, milk, poultry, and dal, superior dals. This demand shows that the demand for superior foods is rising in this country. And this cannot rise because a small middle class is consuming more and more of this stuff. It is because the population at large is consuming more and more of superior foods. This at least should tell you that the story is not one of increasing distress, but of actually decreasing distress and of growing prosperity. People at large are buying more and more of these superior foods, and we are incapable of actually increasing production fast enough to meet this demand. Milk production is going for only 4%.
Yeah. So let me bring Mr. Kanoria.
I just want to say that we are actually not, there is no increase in misery or distress. Living standards are improving, and which is why we actually have inflation in food.
So, and therefore, if one were to build on your example, then you shouldn't be talking about interest rates either as a cause of.
No, I don't see interest rates as a cause of food. I'm talking about interest rates.
Yeah.
No, it is not.
Mr. Kanoria, is agriculture something that industry or all of us need to pay more attention to?
Yeah. So I am going to shift this discussion a little bit and talk not about what are the problems, but what are the solutions.
Yeah.
We have developed from FICCI a 12-point agenda talking about solutions. The number one issue there is the fiscal deficit. We are not talking about fiscal deficit from the point of view of subsidies and so on. We are talking about fiscal deficit as contributing to inflation because it results in consumptive expenditure, and fiscal deficit contributing to high interest rates because it crowds out private borrowing. So we say that the fiscal deficit is one of the root causes of the problem and needs to be addressed. The second point we've said is that we need financial reforms. We should move towards GST, which we believe in a holistic sense is a transparent method of administering a tax. It is self-policing because every person is...
But Mr. Kanoria, doesn't everyone agree with the need for GST? The problem is maybe the fact that the states
whatever
are not
it is,
able to...
I think the solutions, we are really talking about the solutions.
Right,
I
fair
mean, the
enough.
point is that, you know, we can get into a debate as to why politics on this is not letting it happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, do we really want that, or do we want to talk about what are the constructive ways in which we can address the problem?
Yeah.
So when I talk about GST, I think what we don't realize is self-policing, so it's much easier to administer because every person who pays value-added tax becomes responsible for paying it for the entire chain, which means that anyone who buys the goods from a previous chain, himself or herself or the corporation, ensures that the taxes, that compliance is maintained.
Right. So reduce fiscal deficit, bring in goods and services
Bring in
tax.
goods and services. Third is, we've talked about infrastructure, which requires long-term financing, and infrastructure requires a transparent method of allocation of natural resources, which I think is a very critical aspect. Some of this has got embroiled in an imbroglio of how this is to be done. We believe that there has to be a judicious mix between government wanting to meet its social objectives and at the same time wanting to optimize its profits. I don't think the government can merely optimize profits because that is going to have a detrimental effect on society. So there has to be a method by which this allocation of resources is transparent.
Can you give an example to illustrate the point that
Say
you're
for
making?
example, let's talk about coal. I mean, it was said that, you know, if the coal blocks were auctioned, they would result in a increased income for the government.
Yeah.
Now, in my opinion, they would have resulted in an increased income for the government, but have resulted in a much higher cost of power for every citizen of this country. Therefore, I think the government has to play a developmental role in this, and we need to have a balance between optimizing of profit. The next point I think is very important is that we require more flexibility in our labor systems. I think we, about only 7% of our labor force is in the organized sector, 93% of is in the unorganized. If we want them to migrate from unorganized into organized, we have to create conditions which are flexible enough to actually encourage the use of labor rather than discourage the use of labor. May I finish? I am not getting into a debate. I am giving an opinion.
I have also a question. That since you have spoken about coal,
1 minute, sir.
What is FICCI's view about how the government should have gone about in distributing spectrum?
It is exactly in the manner of natural resource. In my opinion, you see, in retrospect, it is very easy to get into a problem because, you see, as time goes by, the value of the property or the spectrum or coal or natural resource also undergoes a change. Then I think we also have to have this realization that land acquisition is, you see, agriculture, here is where I bring in agriculture. I think agriculture productivity is the number one problem of this country. The number one problem, because if we have to feed a population of 1.6 billion, which is going to happen in 2050, then there is no way we can do it unless we increase agriculture productivity and recognize the shift into protein-rich foods, which is what Mr. Arun talked about. So I think agriculture productivity should not be misplaced with land availability. The greater use of technology, recognizing small holdings of land, trying to build bridges between those small holdings and how to bring in technology. And again, FICCI has done some work on that. We call it a Million Farmers Initiative, where a whole host of corporates have got together and created kind of cooperative situation where you provide all the inputs, whether it is seeds or farm technology, etc., to a bunch of farmers who can then access it. And this has been recognized by the Ministry of Agriculture. We are getting full support from that.
Right.
So
Mr.
I
Kanoria,
think I can go on and on about
exactly.
this,
So
but I think the policies are required to actually bring about a positive change. And I'll come back to my point. When we talk about marketing of these reforms, I think there is not going to be any gain without pain. There will be sections of society which are going to get hurt in the process of reform. I think we have to address those concerns, but look at the greater good of this country, which results in poverty alleviation and change in the income levels and choice.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Shashank Gilan from Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. I have two sets of questions. The first to Dr. Ahluwalia, that we are targeting direct subsidy transfers to the poor through the Aadhaar card system. But in the first phase, we might, as we have read recently, we might be missing out on 94% of the subsidy pertaining to food, fertilizer and petroleum products. So will this actually help the country rein in the deficit problem that the country is looking at from the subsidy angle? Second is to Mr. Basu. We have been talking about how agriculture has been important to us, but at the same time, we have been looking at how subsidy to, say, power sectors, be it unabashed free power to or subsidized power to the agriculture sector, or not taxing, say, the super rich farmers. We have super rich farmers in our country. So do these policies for, say, where we say that we are champions of the poor, the political parties do say we are champions of the poor, do these help the country on development front in developing the technology for the agriculture front as such?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
This is Prabhat. I come from the IT industry. I'm a new entrepreneur. I wanted to extend the points that Mr. Kanoria was saying. This is about policy making, law making, etc. I think if we talk about the problems that India is facing, all of us will agree, right? It is not about Congress versus BJP versus left. All of us will agree. We disagree about how to reach our goals. So doesn't it make sense that we all sit down on the table, come up with a common minimum program like NDA came or like UPA came, come up with a common minimum program that has some detailed but very basic objective goals that, okay, for financial sector, we want to reach there by this, well, let's say 2020, or let's say 2025, whatever, right? Then whichever government can come into, the place, they can define how to reach there.
Sure.
But they cannot deviate from the goals, because right now what is happening is we are just bickering about, okay, we don't want to do this, we don't want to do that. Should we do this? Should we not do that? And we are not reaching anywhere.
Okay.
That is leading to the notion of policy.
I got your question. Yeah, I think it's a good question. Yes.
Hi, this is Amit. I'm from IFT and work in energy sector. My question is, we have development in restricted to some cities in India, and there is a gradual large shift of population from rural areas which are coming to the urban centers for employment. Why don't we have investment in these rural areas so that this shift is stopped and we can have equal employment and growth all over the country?
Okay. Lots of questions. TK, you want to come back with a more journalistic view on this question about, can we have an agenda that's minus the political parties which everyone agrees to and will implement?
See, the place where all of us sit together is actually Parliament, where all political parties. Yes. So something like the goods and services tax, which in principle nobody should have any objection to, has been stalled for partisan political reasons. The BJP held states have been opposing rolling out GST, and not for any valid fiscal or economic reasons. So this kind of obstructionism prevails in our polity. That's why I said political reform is required. Now, this is wishful thinking. You need to get the parliamentary processes aligned to upholding people's interests. And this will happen when people punish political parties which actually obstruct progress and policy making. So that is why this whole idea of communicating effectively the reform agenda to the people matters. If it is communicated properly, then people will discriminate between what is right and what is wrong and oppose parties that oppose these sensible ideas.
TK, we have to go in for a break, so we'll come back and we'll continue our conversation. We've got about 4 or 5 good questions to answer and debate in our last segment when we come back on India Interact. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching India Interacts. We're coming to you from the JNU Convention Center in Delhi. We're talking about the future of reforms. We seem to have agreed on a few things that we should do, and we're also talking about what can be implemented. We just had some interesting questions from the audience about the implementability, the need for political parties to get together. Some of it seems wishful. Some of it, Dr. Ahluwalia, may not be as wishful and more specific. Any point that you want to specifically pick up on?
Well, I'll just pick up one point that Nilotpal had raised. You know, I agree with him, by the way, that agriculture is important, public investment for agriculture is important. It's not true that it has been going down. Because actually, what has happened is, in the 10th plan, it's probably true that public investment was going down, but actually private investment was shooting up. In the 11th plan, which is just finished, both public and private investment has shot up. You know, a lot of when we talk about investment in agriculture, what do we mean? We mean irrigation, big increases taking place there. We mean rural roads. You know, the PMGSY program, very popular program, has hugely helped in many areas to increase rural connectivity. The overall road program is a very important program for opening up the hinterland. And of course, all the investment that's going into expanding electricity in rural areas. Now, each of these can be implemented better. So you could always come back and say, yes, but you should have implemented better. But it's simply not true that public investment is not going up in agriculture. Public investment as a share of agricultural GDP has increased during the entire 11th plan period. And you know, my colleague Abhijit Sen, who is a member of the Planning Commission, is the one who's written the chapter on agriculture, so you should look at it. And there's no doubt about that in my view. You know, some of these other issues, I don't believe, I mean, look, democratic politics is not about sitting around a table and abolishing politics. I think that you need to operate at multiple levels. Political parties are quite capable of debating, discussing, even fighting. Somewhere people ought to know what's happening, and different people contribute to that knowledge. I think I sort of share the concern that was expressed that perhaps mechanisms for putting that message across need to be improved. That's something that, you know, government doesn't do this kind of what you would call propagandizing. It should be done by political parties, by think tanks, and so on. I feel one of the big problems, frankly, is that the motivation behind the media at the moment is a lot more sensationalist. There are phenomenally good things going on. They do not appear on television. The entire focus is on whatever wrong thing is happening. I'm not saying, by the way, that wrong things aren't happening. But you know, no country can achieve the kind of growth rate we did without huge individual, regional success stories. I mean, let me just give you one example. 10 years ago, almost no municipality in this country had a solid waste management program. In the last 10 years, there are about 200 municipalities that have started a solid waste management program. They collect the waste, they convert it into energy or into compost. At the micro level, a lot of things are happening. Unfortunately, it's not being spread out. I don't know what the solution is. It's not the job of the Planning Commission to be doing this kind of thing.
So you've tried by opening a Facebook page and so on, I noticed.
Yeah, I know. I mean, look, government on communication, government organizations are always going to be behind the curve. It is for political parties, think tanks, universities, industry, commentators to do this kind of thing. Because after all, you can't sort of continually be blowing your own trumpet. We put out the facts. The facts are there, they're very clearly there. And I think I feel we need a more informed debate. Okay. So this is actually a plug for Rajya Sabha TV.
Right.
You know.
Okay, TK, I think we're coming to the end of the show. So in that context, what are the two things that we can really pick up on as we go into 2013, which can potentially turn into something real?
Yeah. See, one is about the fiscal deficit. Now, I'm not
and we're saying a reform step.
No.
Since we started with that.
See, at a time when investment in the economy is low and the private sector is not doing great things to invest, I don't think it's a prime concern for the government to cut down the fiscal deficit. Rather, what the money the government borrows should be put to, I think should be the focus. Rather than bringing down the overall size of the deficit, it will make sense, in my opinion, for the government to step up investment in projects like the Delhi-Mumbai infrastructure corridor, in agriculture,
so
and roads.
Do you have any faith in this, the investment board coming together? And
I think so. I hope so. I think it will.
Do you think that structure will resolve some of the problems?
I think it will resolve a great deal of many problems. It's a very good thing that the government has thought of, and this is an important thing to step up investment in the economy.
Sure.
That is one.
I'm assuming, Mr. Kanoria, you're nodding a yes to that.
Absolutely.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
100%.
Second thing is, in the abstract, you cannot build infrastructure. Infrastructure mostly requires land. So a policy for releasing land for non-agriculture uses has to be put in place, which we actually still don't have. This policy bill we have for land acquisition, in my opinion, is grossly inadequate. We have to discuss, put on the agenda the idea of lease. Why should farmers necessarily lose the land?
Right. Okay.
I mean, the broad idea being, farmers should continue to have a stake in whatever comes up on the land they lose. That stakeholder should be retained. In some way it is happening. Mayavadi is offering farmers some 13% of the land in a developed form after development. So they get the benefit. They get annuity, they get upfront compensation. Now, in Nagarpatra, farmers created their own city.
Yeah.
That's a great deal of entrepreneurship. Now in Singur in West Bengal, nothing was what happened. You just took away land from farmers, got some pittance as compensation. So we need to have more imagination, which has not been required in any other country in the world, in persuading farmers to release land for non-agricultural purposes.
Got it. TK, we're running out of time, so I'm going to get two quick questions from here, and then we'll come back for our sum up and also get Mr. Basu. Anyone here? There was a lady. Yes, go ahead.
I'm from IIFT and I'm also working for an MNC bank. My question to the panel is that we have been talking about financial inclusion and the agriculture. What is the role of banking industry you think is in all of this? Okay. Keeping in mind the fact that apart from one of the leading nationalized bank, no other bank has been contributing to it much.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Pankaj Mishra. I am from IFT. So my question is to Dr. Ahluwalia. Sir, reform depends upon the present scenario, and I'm not blaming you, but you are doing quite well. I mean, the planning commission at the top level, they're framing policies and we see in the newspaper. But where do you think the difficulty lies? It lies with the government who are not controlling the system, scams are happening, or with opposition to whom we have selected those people for discussion, but generally we see opposition opposes the thing. You take a policy, they will oppose. Or with the media, because as you said just now, that negative news are all over. 50% of the newspaper is with advertisement, the rest 50 with negative news. Or with we, the common people, because we are not selecting the right people. And since you are not selecting the right people, so you can frame a policy, but you cannot force them to implement it.
Okay. So we're running out of time. So Mr. Basu, can I come? Why don't you answer that question? I mean, you know, whose fault is it? And
I think fundamentally in an open society, in a society where there are multiple views, I quite agree with Dr. Ahluwalia that debate is bound to happen, and that is in fact a very healthy thing. And I will also refer to the slant that TK was making about Parliament not transacting business. While this is true, you see, parliamentary democracy is all about the accountability of the executive to the legislature. Now, you cannot run roughshod over that foundational principle of our democracy, that the government needs to be accountable. Now, recent experiences on certain occasions where Parliament have been disrupted is because of governments precisely running away from discharging or redeeming that principle of accountability. For example, on 2G spectrum. I mean, after all, government, after wasting the whole session, came to this point, or on the FDI in retail. You see, the government has to come because RBI has done an amendment which has to be placed on the table of the House, and there has to be a voting. So the question is that there will be multiple views, and I think, you see, there cannot be a common minimum program so far as economic agenda are concerned. I mean, you like it or not, we represent different interests, and he will never agree that the privatization of natural resources cannot take place at the cost of the community. You give on a dole cheap price spectrum, and then the company sells it in the secondary market and pockets the profit. I mean, that can never be allowed. So yes,
Mr. Basu, can I,
transparency, but first of all, the government has to constitutionally in legislative terms recognize that the natural resources are a community asset, and it is to be distributed in a manner which helps the community, as the Supreme Court has pointed out.
Mr. Basu, we've run out of time. Mr. Basu, can I
TK about land?
Yeah, okay. Last few words, Mr. Kanoria, and then Mr. Dr. Ahluwalia.
Number one, I normally don't take up issues, but I think the biggest inclusive,
and we're closing now. Yeah,
the biggest inclusive growth story in this country has been the telecom industry. So let us not underestimate the power of cheap telephony, which has actually pervaded this country, number one. Number two, if we talk about politics, I think we need to mature. If we are going to have coalition politics, and this is going to stay in this country, we need to shift away from party-based politics to issue-based politics. So if we can have debates in parliament, it should be on issues, not on party positions.
That's what exactly what our audience is saying as well.
Really what I think. So my view is that that's my last comment is actually only issue-based and party-based. That's it.
Good. Dr. Ahluwalia? I think there was a point about the banking system and whether it will deliver inclusion. Since we started by saying that inclusion is a critical part of the reform process in the financial space, at least, are you confident that banks will deliver?
I think one should never claim too much. And it's interesting. I mean, you started off in this very narrow point, and then we've ranged over a huge area. Now I'll come back to that narrow point. Yeah. So let me just say that I do believe that with the introduction of Aadhaar and the unique ID, the Reserve Bank has issued instructions to the banks that anybody who has an Aadhaar number can get a no-frills account. This will actually enable large numbers of people to actually get a bank account. Now, you know, getting a bank account isn't much use if you're simply relying on your own income to put it into. But the important thing is hundreds of thousands of crores are being paid by the government through different mechanisms. Magnarega payments, scholarships, payments for Janani Suraksha Yojana, etc. All of this could go straight to a bank account using the Aadhaar ID. Now, you know, the most important thing in this program is that deduplication will be automatic. So half the problem is that a person has two different identities under which they're getting benefits. That'll get knocked out. You know, fiscal deficit reduction, somebody talked about. Some of the experiments that they've done in Andhra Pradesh shows that the pure duplication of benefits ranges between 20 and 40%. So quite frankly, if you're really trying to target people that you've identified, you'll save a lot of money, and maybe you could put some of this money back into increasing their transfers and cutting out the bogus ones. So I think that you will see, my guess would be that in the next 5 years, that's not a huge amount of time, the number of people who will have bank accounts will explode. I think people do not appreciate that if you have a bank account and there is a banking correspondent in your village, you don't have to go to the bank branch to draw your money. You just go along to the banking correspondent, transfer money from your account to his account electronically, and collect the money from him, and he gets a commission from the bank. So frankly, to ordinary people, this could save half a day, if not a whole day. Because if your bank branch is, whatever, 12 kilometers away, it might take a huge amount of your day just to get there. And when you get there, the clerk pushes you out and doesn't pay you the attention that he's paying to richer people and all the rest of it. 5 years, I believe, 5 years, what Mr. Kanoria said about telecom as a hugely inclusive technology development, I think the unique ID and inclusive banking will be the same story.
I think you've already added about 147 million no-frill accounts in the last 4 years or 5 years.
Yeah, but we're going to, I mean, that will include, I mean, it'll probably expand to many more.
Yeah, so the rate of growth there, I think, may help you achieve your objective. I mean,
but you see, it's not just the no-frill account, it's the number of transactions that go through it. And look, if I have to collect my scholarship through a check, you can be 100% sure that I'm either waiting a long time or I'm bribing somebody to give me the check. All that will disappear.
Yeah. And some states are already doing that and saving money.
I'm not aware that they're doing it in
but-
this unique ID method.
No, not
yet.
a unique ID. I think Maharashtra, for instance, decided to put scholarship money into bank accounts and has found that it saved a lot of money. Because,
Yes, but the problem with that is it doesn't take care of the duplication problem. What the unique ID will do, it will take care of duplication problem.
Got it. Okay. Right. So I think we've run out of time. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We've had an interesting conversation on India in Tracks about the future of reforms. I think we've spoken about a range of reforms. We've also spoken about a few. We've understood the need for heads to be knocked together in Parliament and converge on some issues which are critical to India's growth. But I think most people would believe that reforms are in place, reforms are moving, and the growth story still looks good. Perhaps it needs to be just sold better. That's it from me at the JNU convention. Thanks for watching.